I'm here with my friend Nico, who just graduated architecture school and is now working to be a licensed architect.
True.
Okay, I have many questions for you. I have a theme that I want to talk about.
Okay.
But first question, what got you into design?
As a kid, I used to assemble furniture for my dad, and he sold mid-century modern furniture in Somerville, Mass, and that's
You would
That's it.
assemble it.
assemble it. Yeah, because it comes in a box from Denmark or Germany or Japan or whatever, and then you assemble it and they put it on a showroom and then they sell it.
What age is this?
This is like 11, 12 to end of high school. Like 18 or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're working with your hands, seeing good design,
Yeah.
in and around good design constantly.
Colors, materials, different methods of assembly.
And so your intro into design, you didn't go to architecture school right away.
That's right. I did industrial design first as an undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, explain, say more.
Industrial design covers a lot of different products, like the camera that we're using, the microphone, or your Nikes, or like a Coke bottle, or a Honda fender, or anything that needs to be considered in terms of form and aesthetic and function. Phone cases, all that stuff is industrial design, and furniture fits into that. And that was kind of what I was most interested in.
It's almost like design of everything but houses, or
Yeah, if
like
you're
buildings,
designing a house, then you're an architect. But fixtures are industrial design.
industrial design.
Yeah.
Everything that fills a house, industrial design. But the house in and of itself,
Yeah.
we're talking like structural architecture.
Yeah, objects,
Yeah.
industrial design, and production lines and production systems, and that. When you're talking about architecture, you don't really talk about the lumber mill and how things are produced for architecture. It's mostly just the buildings and how they're shaped and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, well today I want to talk about this thing that I was thinking about. I saw what I thought was an ugly house the other day.
Really?
Yeah, and I was trying to figure out why I thought it was ugly, like why I didn't find it appealing.
Okay.
And the reason was it felt like the designers defaulted to symmetry everywhere, with the windows above the windows, with the windows opposite the windows, with the doors, there was so much symmetry happening that it felt just something felt off, and to me it looked ugly. And so I began to think about symmetry in design and when we use it, because I know it can be appealing and it can feel good. But I think it can also be a default that it's not lazy, but is not good design sometimes.
Too easy or too, well...
too, assumed, or it's too, I don't know, effortless? No, that's not it. Just tell me what you think about symmetry in design, or...
So I think a lot of times people are bored with symmetry because it's kind of like an insult to your intellect. Like your brain reads a composition and understands it very quickly when it's symmetrical. We're just kind of programmed to see symmetry because of our faces, because of the way the world is laid out.
And it puts us at ease, kind of?
Puts us at ease, but in terms of aesthetics in buildings and objects, symmetry can be boring. So it can be ugly in a way. And when I say ugly, I mean not interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
I found the house to be very uninteresting because everything was just so.
Yeah.
And matching. And, in the Cabbage, because it was a renovation, I was dealing with a lot of things that were already here. and trying to problem solve the asymmetry that already existed instead of spending money to try to make things symmetrical.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Right. So I ended up embracing a lot of asymmetry. I mean, in this room in particular, the dining nook, there is symmetry.
Yeah.
There is a lot of symmetry happening in here.
Yeah, totally.
But in other rooms, I just had to embrace the asymmetry. So I found, an appreciation for that things slightly askew.
Mm. I think things being slightly askew makes them interesting to us, compositionally speaking. It's kind of like, even if you're not questioning, well, why is this bigger than that or below this and slightly off? But when you scan a town and all the houses are exactly the same, for instance, with a housing development, your mind reads the pattern really quickly, understands every single unit, and you're like, that's a housing unit. And it's not that pleasing to look at. Or you might see a housing unit that is designed very intentionally to be just off enough, like a pattern for a wallpaper, for instance, where you can't actually see where the pattern is repeating. And so your brain, when I said like your intellect is insulted by symmetry, I mean like your brain is given just enough variety that it's pleased to kind of discover things as you look at them and not fully understand them in their entirety all at once.
That makes me think of like the houses along canals, like say in Amsterdam, where there's so much variety that it's really visually interesting, even though they're stacked next to each other, like
a housing
development.
Yeah.
But because there's different colors and trim and exterior flourishes, it's really beautiful and picturesque.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're saying with the housing development, when you go symmetrical, matchy across the board, it's dull.
Yeah, it gets boring.
Uninspiring.
It gets boring real fast.
Yeah.
And then what you're bringing up in Amsterdam also, I think, speaks to the topic of context, where each individual unit might be perfectly symmetrical. Everything might be the same color or evenly divided on its own facade. But then that speaks to a larger context when the next facade is actually slightly proportionally different. And then all of a sudden you have symmetry working with asymmetry all across the board on on a street block, for instance. So symmetry becomes less insulting or less boring, I guess.
Yeah.
As long as it's mixed in with some more variety that, mixes things up.
Context in terms of design. What is that?
So context just means like a building just got demolished on a block with 10 other buildings, and you're deciding what to build there. You can design a completely new looking thing that has nothing to do with what's existing, which I would call the context. Or you could read the information that's to the left and to the right and behind and in front of what's across the street, is it facing south? Like all of those things create almost like a lopsidedness. It's like there are pushes and pulls for decision making in the design process. And those are going to come from different angles.
Yeah.
You can either ignore them or you can play with them.
Well, and that definitely comes into play when you're renovating.
Totally.
The context is the home.
Exactly.
That's pre-existing this renovation. And I think unknowingly, because I don't have a degree in any of these things, unknowingly it was like I was trying to match proportions, not necessarily symmetry, but like this room, because this was the only little addition, I was trying to like proportionally add it to this home so that it fit the context. The window sizes matched. Yeah. And, no wall in this house is larger than like 17 feet. And so I was like, okay, this room has a perimeter, like it has limitations. So context, I didn't really think about, or I didn't know that as the word of like, when you're renovating a house, a great renovation plays into the context of what's existing.
Choosing what to keep, what to annihilate completely.
Yeah. But making that decision, it's not a free-for-all. It's like, what of the original home and context is worth carrying through the renovation.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Have you renovated a house before?
Yeah, I just renovated my house.
And how's the context?
I didn't pay too much attention to my neighbors.
What their houses look like?
Yeah, what their houses look like.
So you changed the exterior?
The exterior changed. Basically everything changed except for the roof lines.
Okay.
The footprint of the house is the same.
Okay.
I took out every single interior wall. It was riddled with tiny little rooms.
Yeah.
There are still really low ceilings, so there was this feeling of like, okay, we have low ceilings and we can't do anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
What do? We have to increase window size to bring light in because they have deep spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of straying from symmetry, but these are the decisions I had to make. Was basically, how do I turn this kind of mousetrap feeling house into like a nice breathing space that I want to be in.
Yeah, and you did it?
Yeah, all the walls are gone, so they're just
it's like open.
It's an L-shaped footprint.
Uh-huh.
Two different eras, like 1950s and 1970s. One is cinder block and one is stick frame.
Uh-huh.
And I just united the two with like a flowing space, and the kitchen is right in between the two spaces. And I designed it to be so that each side of the L, each leg of the L could be its own sort of semi-private unit, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two mailboxes out front, there's two entry doors.
But united in the same kitchen.
They use the same kitchen.
Huh.
Yeah.
So some asymmetry. Not to get too heady, but it's like asymmetry in, well, we talked about function too, off camera. Asymmetry in format, symmetry in function. Like, using the space in a similar way. Yeah. We don't have to get into that. It's a digression.
Okay.
What else about symmetry? Initially I had said I was kind of going down this rabbit hole of like symmetry is the enemy of good design. What I first said to you was, you know that quote, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, which I don't remember who it's by. And then I was like, oh, well, don't let symmetry be the enemy of good design. To which you said...
I said, well, we've got like a whole podcast about this that we need to make.
Well, you were like, no, that's not right. Symmetry can be good.
Yeah, it's just a rule, right? And the rule, like in your Amsterdam example, it applies to one facade, but then that same rule is not applying to the whole block.
Yeah.
So when you choose to follow it, and when you don't, like we did your knobs on your doors the other day, we did symmetry in this way, but we didn't do it on the larger plan. So we chose when to use asymmetry and when to use symmetry.
Is there, like for someone who's designing their home or doing DIY home renovations, home projects, do you think inherently it's just a feeling or a preference?
It's a really good question. How do you establish whether it's time to use symmetry or not?
Yes,
I think
that's what we'd all like to know.
Like, let's say you got a bathroom vanity.
Yeah.
And you have this beautiful mirror that your mother gave you. Do you center the mirror above the sink and have equally sized sconces on either side, or how do you do this composition? Because a vanity is very much like a composition. It's planar and two-dimensional. It's not really a three-dimensional space that you go around.
Right.
So how do you make this two-dimensional composition? The things you have with you, the sconces, the mirror, those are going to inform whether the thing should the sink be off to the side so that you can have the mirror and the powder room stuff on this side? Yeah. Is the depth of your bathroom accommodating a deep countertop? That means you can have a sink with room behind it to have your perfumes and powder things? Or
you know so much.
Do you have to separate them? Do you have two sinks? So all of those things are going to tell you where your mirror goes. Yeah. And then if you have all the space you need and you don't have constraints based on the materials you're working with, you have to then make a decision like, okay, where do I put this mirror compositionally?
Yeah.
And I think the default would be put the mirror in the center, put the two sconces on either side, and you'd have to give me a good reason not to do that.
Okay, that's good. I like that, where you're going with that. It's like, we can default to symmetry. It's almost like you need to warrant a decision either way.
Yeah.
Like, the design needs to be warranted either way.
I use the word alibi.
Ah, okay.
You gotta make an
more.
alibi for things. Like,
For design decisions.
in
everything.
architecture school, and then hopefully throughout your career, or maybe unfortunately throughout your career,
Yeah.
you're fabricating alibis for decisions. You're fabricating a reason behind why you do things.
Oh.
And I mean, the downside of it in architecture school is that a lot of times it just feels like you're making up stuff. Like you're creating some kind of narrative out of nowhere as to why this should be this way and not that way.
Yeah,
and
because a lot of what you're doing is like in your head.
Yeah, or
you're not dealing in real time.
It could be diagrams that you're showing people, but you're going to make a case in front of your client.
But these are like buildings that don't exist. They're like
or they could exist. It could be me designing your vanity and creating an alibi for why the mirror should go to the left. I'm like, you know what? You got this window here, and it's putting light on the situation in this weird way.
Yeah.
And this
I
is
love
what
that
happens.
idea of alibi.
Yeah.
That I've got about 1,000 alibis in this house.
Yeah, you do.
Well, yes. I like that because I've never heard that as a concept, or like, for me, renovating this house, there was a lot of like addressing the perfectionism and the feeling of like need to get these decisions right.
Yeah.
But I think maybe I was like looking for the alibis in a lot of these very kind of obscure decisions that only I had to answer for.
Yeah.
Because I was the one doing it and living here.
Yeah.
That's really, I like that a lot. Alibis.
Yeah. So you used the word right. Like I was looking for the decision that was right.
Yeah.
Which means you're judging what's happening.
Yes.
And that judgment, I think, is gonna be based on your use of the effects of what you've decided to do throughout the life of whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's function.
Yes.
How does your decision, what implications does your decision have on the functioning of your space?
Yeah. Function's huge for me.
Yeah.
As a professional organizer.
And it should be.
Yeah.
Rightly
Having worked, because like my intro into design, I think, has really been through other people's homes and the dysfunction of other people's homes.
Yeah.
Right? I entered people's homes as a professional organizer to help solve problems in space.
Yeah, that's to my mind, that's a really easy in to decision making. You show up to a space.
What's not working.
And you like have your habits from your space and all the spaces you've known throughout your life, and you show up and you try to use the silverware drawer, and all of a sudden you're like, I can't use this the way it is. It's just it's running into the fridge, or it's dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. That's, for me, those are alibis that don't even really need to be fabricated because they're so based in function that they're screaming at you. They're like, oh my God, if this was just slightly different, I could use it so much easier and my life would be easier. Mm-hmm. Every time I open this drawer, my experience of getting silverware out of it would be that much easier. Yeah. And then I might want to entertain more, or I might want to, I don't know.
Yeah. So for people who, again, like back to people who are doing home improvement projects on their own. And I know that alibis, like the seeking out of the alibi, is probably not common practice for most people who don't think in design terms or like have a keen awareness of space. How do you teach that? How do you cultivate that?
I think people are creating alibis for themselves. I mean, and this goes beyond design. I think we're constantly creating alibis for ourselves as to like how we choose to do what we do in life. You know, the decision-making process in general sometimes requires an alibi, but then there's fight or flight, and you don't have a chance to create an alibi for the decisions you make in life. But in terms of design, I would say people are just any old person that has no background in art or anything is gonna have to create some alibi. They're not gonna go and hang the thing. They're gonna say to themselves, "Well, I gotta put a hole in my wall."
Well, a lot of people stop there. The amount of clients I would go into their homes and just like, art's not going up because I don't know where to put it.
Yeah.
Just forever, for years.
I mean, I have studied art and architecture and all this stuff, and I have paintings I haven't hung yet in my house because
No alibi.
I can't find the right place to put it.
Yeah.
And that, you know.
But I think people get really clogged up with those kind of decisions.
Yeah.
And that's the pain point of like creating a home that you love, is that you some people like can't make the decisions.
Yeah.
Or they're too afraid to make the wrong move. Because it doesn't feel justified, or maybe because they can't tap into what the alibi would be.
Yeah.
What's the reason? Which brings me back full circle of just like we then default to a symmetry thing.
Some rule that we're
some
comfortable
rules.
with.
Yeah, we default to some rules that maybe don't make our homes feel like us, but they make them feel like homes.
Standard.
There's a wall here. We're gonna put the TV on the wall and the couch behind it and the things on the side and hopefully a lamp, like, and the art there and the thing, and these all become like default practices.
Yeah.
That create a home, a place to live in, but not necessarily a home that feels like you or feels like your sanctuary.
Yeah. I think the question of this kind of brainless way of following a prescribed way to set up a TV room or whatever, on the topic of symmetry, it's always going to be problematic if you just take a rule from somewhere else and apply it into a new context where symmetry maybe just functionally doesn't make any sense at all because you don't actually have the space for symmetry, or there's a window that's already asymmetrical on your space. And then you might say to yourself, well, we have to use this wall symmetrically. So all of a sudden the TV is like all up against the window.
Yes.
And you're looking at it and you're like, well, we used a rule to place the TV. And the rules in all these books the magazines and stuff, it says the TV should go there and the couch should go here. We follow those rules.
Right.
But we ended up with a space that's dysfunctional.
Doesn't feel right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know how much that plays into like the person and their identity and their decisions and their space.
I think a lot.
But it's definitely, I mean, I think you start to take ownership, if you start to take ownership of your decision-making process and recognize that you're making an alibi, get good at making alibis, saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, should I follow that symmetry rule in order to place my TV? Or actually, is my house calling for this to not even be a TV room at all? And maybe I should rethink that. Or maybe, you know what, maybe we should trade this huge TV in for a slightly smaller one that'll fit a little bit to the left. Or, you know, who knows what the situation is.
Yeah.
But just to take into account the context, once again, to see, because the context is you, it's the space you already have. It's that funky grandma's couch thing that you have. That's gonna inform everything else by allowing it to take up space and push things around the room, around, you know, how you, I mean, that there's a skill obviously involved in that.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
hopefully that answers that question.
Maybe. I had another thought when you were saying that, but I think it is a skill and it's a hard skill. And I talk about it in another episode where I talk about, and it's like a watered down version of all of the kind of probably or what you've studied, and I'm sure it's very technical, but I did an episode about when you're kind of dreaming up your dream home, one thing you can do is be really observational out in the world.
Oh yeah.
Like,
well, when you pay an architect to show up and help you with these designs, decisions and stuff, you're paying somebody who's been looking at this stuff a lot more than you. So if you start looking around, and obviously looking around begets more looking around, or the skill of looking around makes you better at looking around.
Yeah.
So you might go and say, okay, he told me to go look around before I design my room. And then you go to look around for the first time ever in your life with this intention to look around, and all of a sudden you're like, what am I looking for? What in the world was he talking about?
Yep.
And I think maybe that has to do with finding a friend who you think knows how to look and just paying attention to what they observe.
Yeah.
Or just...
Well, the way I kind of boiled it down was, what are moments you love in your home? Do you love having dinner parties at your table? Do you love reading by the fire? Do you love sitting in this morning sun in a comfortable chair? What are just those moments you love? And then, you don't like this?
No, I do. I've got a lot of thoughts.
Okay, hold on. And then, what are pain points in your home? Yeah. What are things you really don't love?
Yeah.
That the light switch for that light is all the way over there, but you're never coming through that way. Or that there's no hose in the front by the flowers.
Yeah.
And you gotta lug this thing around. So for me, it's like, what are moments of real joy in your home? And then what are moments of pain that are like, I wish this was different.
Yeah.
And that, I was hoping that like gives you some direction with, what should I be paying attention to? Not just like, okay, I'm looking at this room and like, what am I seeing? Windows, like that's a lot. It's a lot of information. But it's more like, what do I love? I love the color of the walls.
Yeah.
And I love seeing all the trees. Yeah. And then from there, you can dive deeper into like, okay, how are these moments designed?
Yeah. I think there's a big difference between the pain moments and the love moments. I think it's because we're creatures of comfort. I think we go the path of least resistance if we can. And so those moments in our spaces and in the function of our daily lives that bother us a little bit, we can form habits around them to the point where we are actually completely numb to them, but somebody who comes into our space actually perceives it as like, holy crap, you've been living with this drawer, this silverware drawer, this whole time like this? God, I've got to help yourself about this. Yes. But then the love part is different, I think, because you have to create an experience with duration of like a log, essentially, of things you love. There's not
or it's like, these are the top, like you have a priority list of like, these are my top 5 things. I want to be able to read by the fire.
Okay.
I want to throw big dinner parties with beautiful light, and I want to have my morning coffee in the sunshine.
Yeah.
And like that's enough to go off of to renovate this house.
Yeah, I've seen you do that. Yeah.
You know, like that's enough to go off of, and no house is gonna have everything, right? Like unless you're building from scratch and doing that, which is, I'm talking about home renovation mostly. No house is gonna have it all. So if you can prioritize like things a couple things that really matter, you can get very close to a home that feels incredible, because at the end of the day, you have these things. And I think I went on to say, like, the pursuit of making those 3 priorities happen, in that pursuit, you will figure out other little gems, other little beautiful design moments along the way.
Sure.
So, yes, I know it's like, it's a lot, but say if we just took 3 things, 3 really important moments to build a house around.
Is one of them symmetry? Probably not.
Probably not. Or you must relinquish, like, yes, no, you're right. Is it symmetry? Probably not.
Yeah.
Symmetry can be an arbitrary rule.
Totally.
That hinders and doesn't help.
Yeah, but if it's like 16th century Italy, you might say to yourself, well, it better goddamn well be symmetrical. Or people are going to call us heretics, and they're going to flatten this palazzo, and it'll never be a thing. There's no palazzo out there that isn't symmetrical.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, and their asymmetries are they sure as hell have some crazy
Problematic.
alibi.
Oh, they have alibis. Yes, that makes sense. That's cool.
And that's really where the art comes in.
Yeah.
Is when your designer found some way to create beauty from something which at the time would have been the standard, which is symmetry.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't allowed to use symmetry, but somehow he made it work with this thing that's like completely off. And you look at it today and you're like, this is beautiful. I don't really understand why, because I didn't study art history, but this is beautiful. And the truth is, there's a lot behind it because he understands.
Do you have an example of that? You can look up?
Not off the top of my head, but I could share it with you.
Share
you
it in the link in the description.
Exactly.
Okay.
There's a lot of that happening in Rome, because there's a lot of precedent in Rome. There's a lot of the context coming before this building, and then someone's hired to resolve an issue.
Yeah.
That we've just expanded this facade. We have this beautiful facade that's all in marble and blah blah blah. And we've expanded, and we want everyone to know that this other expansion is part of the same building and the same facade. How do you draw the facade out? You know, there's examples like that all over the place.
Interesting. We'll link one in the description.
Yeah.
Well, this has been enlightening. I feel like we've gone on way long.
Great.
Real
You
long.
got some content. You can, trim it off, trim the fat.
No, we won't be doing any of that. Last question.
Okay.
What is your must-have feature in your dream home?
Sunset.
Sunset views.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I've noticed that the times I've lived in places that have really nice sunset views, they have this way of just grounding me back to like what's important in life or something every single day. I mean, there's rainy days too, but yeah. When you live in a place that's got lots of trees, like here in the Northeast, and you don't get above that tree line and you don't get a sunset, somehow, it's just not the same on a daily basis. I think that, for me, the sunset, like it could just be in a hammock in the top of a tree with the sunset, and I'd be happy.
Great.
I don't know if that helps you.
That's the exact answer.
I do
that
need
must-have features.
I need a sunset.
Okay. Yeah. Good answer. All right. Thanks. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
In my home, in my kitchen.